Welcome to Capitol Hill. Tony Abbott's kicked off his political year with a more positive speech on what a coalition government would do. He's also found a way around the tricky political task of making promises or guarantees by having an aspiration to have a Medicare-funded dental scheme, and also saying a full national disability insurance scheme would have to wait until the budget's in strong surplus. He's committed to spending a week a year in an Indigenous community and says his government would spend some of the savings on the national broadband network on easing traffic congestion. On the other side of politics, a man who knows what it's like to be a leader under siege, Simon Crean, had some blunt advice for his colleague Kevin Rudd. You won't be Prime Minister again. Joining me to discuss the day's events are Liberal MP Andrew Southcott and Labor MP Ed Husic. Welcome to you both.
Hey, Lyndall, Andrew.
Thank you, Lyndall. We'll start the program hearing from Tony Abbott and his address to the National Press Club.
The big problem, though, with Medicare as it stands is that it supports treatment for every part of the body except the mouth. People sometimes spend years on Medicare-funded antibiotics because they can't get Medicare-funded dentistry. 1 in 3 Australians say that they've avoided dental treatment because they can't afford it. Now, I stress that Medicare-funded dentistry is an aspiration, not a commitment. Like the disability insurance, this would be an expensive reform at over $4 billion a year. It's the kind of initiative that can't responsibly be implemented until the budget returns to strong surplus. We will deliver tax cuts without a carbon tax. The precise timing and the precise quantum is something that we will announce in good time before the next election.
He also said on Triple M, going for the hard interviews, on the 13th of July 2011, I think it's possible to find the savings needed to pay for significant tax cuts without a carbon tax. But today he's walked away from that commitment. He admitted that tax cuts in their first term could only be in prospect. He said by the close of the next coalition government's first term, more tax cuts will be in prospect. So he's offering a tax cut to mining companies, he's offering a tax cut to carbon polluters, but if you're on $30,000 or $40,000 or $50,000 a year, you will lose the tax cuts which only Labor is delivering.
Andrew, is this the start of Tony Abbott shedding his Dr. No image and turning to I guess, Dr. Maybe on some things, maybe on a dental scheme, not yet on a disability insurance scheme, and maybe on a second round of tax cuts?
Well, the speech was a very good speech, and I do recommend that your viewers have a look at that speech. And what it showed is the sort of approach that Tony would take as Prime Minister. And there were a lot of things which are really in continuity with the policies that he had as a minister in the Howard government. He stressed things like mutual obligation and work for the dole. The principle that he had as minister with the Job Network, and that was working with non-government organisations and the private sector to deliver services better than what the government can deliver. And in the area of Medicare, you mentioned the dental scheme. In the area of Indigenous affairs, this is something that Tony has had a long-standing commitment to, and he outlined that in the speech. And I think what the speech really did was give people an idea of the tone and the flavour that Tony Abbott would have as Prime Minister.
He also, though, is a doctor not yet on the full details of how these things would be paid for and the details of the tax cuts he's promised without a carbon tax. Can people hold their judgment on his economic credibility until those things are spelled out?
Well, certainly he was a senior member of the Howard government, and the Howard government did have a very strong track record of delivering budgets in surplus, but also tax cuts year after year and significant increases in benefits for families. What the speech really did show was the importance that Tony places on returning to good economic management, to having a budget surplus, and if you have a budget surplus then there are a lot of things you can do after that.
Ed, if Tony Abbott successfully makes the transition to selling a more positive message, is that a problem for you?
I don't think he's going to. I mean, I thought one of the great things out of today is I think he was asked a question, can you turn yourself into Tony 2.0 in terms of recasting himself? He didn't go from Tony 2.0, he went from Tony 2.0 to Tony 2.0. I mean, he's still demonstrating that he can't move beyond the position that he's got himself in where he opposes everything. And he's previously said and committed the coalition to pulling back on the tax cuts that we provided by lifting the tax-free threshold, by the asset tax or the asset write-off that we're providing for small business, $6,500. That's going. He's committed to also ensuring that the 1% corporate tax rate cut that we'll be delivering, that goes as well. And now today he's walking away from a commitment that he was big and bold about last year and suddenly gone meek about now, which is to deliver further tax cuts. And he's saying, well, at some point down the track we're going to get to it, as was described earlier, that it would be in prospect. Now, I think what we're finding is that the Tony Abbott kaleidoscope, every time you look down it, you could see what you wanted. Tax cuts for all, cutting $70 billion in terms of spending. He's finding that that's all crunching in and he can't deliver. And I think that's the big issue, is that it's easy to say no, it's easy to be negative, harder to come up with solutions, and that's what today showed us.
Might his pledge, though, to be a government that does less better hit some fertile ground, though, with the perception that Labor doesn't deliver things well?
Well, he's good at delivering less. I mean, when he was Health Minister, I recall that he was responsible for seeing $1 billion cut out of health agreements. Under the former Liberal government, we saw bulk billing rates tank. We saw they go on about the surplus and how they got to the surplus. They got to the surplus by spending less on health, spending less on education, parents having trouble getting childcare, taxes higher under the Liberals than what they are under us as a percentage of GDP. I mean, they really didn't deliver what they said that they would or should or what people needed. So, yeah, he was good at delivering less. And, frankly, I mean, Tony Abbott's always good at sprouting ideas that John Howard thought for him, and that's all we'll ever get out of him, a throwback to what they used to deliver and not really anything positive for the future.
If we could move on to the Labor side of politics, and as I mentioned at the beginning, Simon Crean had some frank advice for Kevin Rudd. This is what he had to say.
People will not elect as leaders those they don't perceive as team players, Neil.
And he is not perceived as a team player?
I'll leave that judgment to others.
Well, do you perceive him as a team player?
I think that part of the reason he lost the leadership was that he wasn't. So I think that that's a circumstance that has to be dealt with internally by the party whenever they make these assessments. But I tell you what, there's no point having a band of prima donnas unless they operate as a team.
Where Labor members of Parliament are threatening to resign if Kevin Rudd becomes leader, where the scene on the Labor side of politics is starting to resemble more a scene from the movie Gladiator, where Simon Crean is sticking his trident into Kevin Rudd today, and there's blood and gore spread across the Roman Forum.
Kevin Rudd is doing a great job as Minister for Foreign Affairs. It's very important for a nation our size that we do have our voice heard around the world. We've got a proud tradition of punching above our weight when it comes to making our voice heard around the world, and Kevin Rudd as Foreign Affairs Minister is doing a good job in making sure that our voice is heard.
That was some blunt advice from Simon Crean to Kevin Rudd. Was it necessary?
Well, I've, as a backbencher that just came in at the last election, I haven't had to live through, discussions about leadership and going through transitions. But I figure the best thing that we could do right now is ensure that we focus on the task at hand, which is governing. And I think the Prime Minister demonstrated today that, this is about bringing the team together. And I think that's the best example to follow. And I think it's something that we should all, new and old, be following.
Is it possible to say that the Prime Minister's governing well, that things are going well for Labor?
We've achieved a lot in the face of strident opposition, and some of the things that we've achieved that, for example, Tony Abbott's still not believing that people need faster broadband access so that we can be up to par with what the rest of the world's delivering. I mean, we've done a lot in terms of NBN, bringing a price on carbon, health reform. You look at all those areas where we are making moves, and we can still move on in terms of National Disability Insurance Scheme that we're promoting and advocating. There's a lot to do, and I think that the best way to do it is to be unified and working together as a group.
Andrew, I think it was the Galaxy poll that showed, when you break down the figures on who supports either Kevin Rudd or Julia Gillard, it's Liberal voters who like Kevin Rudd and Labor voters who support Julia Gillard. Is that a little like Labor voters supporting Malcolm Turnbull and Liberal voters supporting Tony Abbott?
Look, I don't know about this, but I think what we're seeing now with Simon Crean and Julia Gillard and Kevin Rudd all out there is they're really focused on just staying in power, and they've forgotten what they're actually meant to be doing. I mean, Simon Crean seems to be taking his inspiration from the siege of Stalingrad, that he's just running a defensive operation for Julia Gillard. Now, it's very obvious that there are talks going on about the leadership of the Labor Party and who should be leading the Labor Party. And while we're seeing families are having increasing pressure of cost of living, the Labor Party are just really focused on staying in power, staying in government, and not doing what they should be doing, which is governing the country.
Ed, is it possible to say that backbenchers, Labor backbenchers, looking at Labor's primary vote in the polls, which at most is 35%, aren't having a little thought about how it could be better?
I think people basically realise that polls will jump around, and we've gone through the similar sort of experiences in years gone past under both governments, where at this time of year you'll see that polls don't necessarily trend as well as you'd want for a government. I mean, the Howard government was recording drops in its primary vote at this time of year as well, as the records will show. Ultimately, the best thing that we can do is basically continue prosecuting the agenda that we do have, which is, as I said before, was jam-packed last year in terms of the type of reforms we look to get through, and we've got more on the horizon that we've got to get done. So, people will look at polls, they'll bounce up and down. Some days they'll be good, some days they won't be so good. But really, this is about a long-term game, and that's what we've got to be focused on.
Andrew, if we could finish quickly on one of the things you mentioned, cost of living. Coles has announced it's cutting prices of fruit and vegetables. Is the competition between Coles and Woolworths actually helping drive down the cost of living?
Well, I think seeing lower prices of fruit and vegetables is a good thing. In principle, it'll be welcomed by consumers. Coles have announced they're doing that today, and we'll see whether it's a short-term thing or a longer-term thing. But I mean, one of the things that people complain about in terms of the pressures of cost of living is the price of fruit and vegetables. They do jump up. They fluctuate quite a bit. So lower prices, in principle, are a good thing for consumers.
And Ed, very quickly, do you think it's a good thing?
Yeah, look, I agree with Andrew on that. I think we've seen, we lived through in the last 12 months what the price of bananas were like. It was a sort of standard round the barbecue joke about how much that cost. Representing a Western Sydney seat, where I sometimes worry that the cost of fast food is cheaper than getting access to fresh fruit and veg. From my perspective, I think it's good to see prices go down.
I'm sorry, that's where we'll have to leave it. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your time.